Potentially, there are a lot of markets we could go after. As a business, you really need to prioritize the bang for the buck, right? Our ideal customers are infrastructure operators. They have assets that are spread out geographically over large areas, and range gives us an edge in terms of the flight time that's sufficient to cover those large areas. They tend to be few customers that have big needs. And so you're not dealing with 100 customers that each need one aircraft, you're dealing with maybe 10 customers that need 100 aircraft. So it's the way to scale.
Welcome to Long-Term Thinking for Business Success, a show for and by business owners. Each episode will explore how to beat the odds and create a sustainable business and the life we've dreamt of. Today's guest is Dario Valenza, the founder of Carbonix, the business he started over 10 years ago. Carbonix creates and provides uncrewed aerial systems to enable precision, long-range data capture at scale. Their uncrewed aerial systems can capture high-resolution data over large geographic areas and complex terrain. By exponentially increasing access to data, they improve workflows, radically reduce costs, empower critical insights, and lower carbon emissions for their projects and clients. Founded and headquarters in Sydney, Carbonix has a network of global partners who provide their customers with access to experts for operational support to ensure mission success. Dario has a passion for design and design thinking, and this has been a thread throughout his life, including building yachts, planes, and cars, as well as creating teams and company structures to turn visions into reality. Dario spent his first decade of his career working on racing yachts as a boat builder, designer, construction manager, and campaign manager. During this time, his achievements included being part of several America's Cup teams and pioneering full hydrofoil for World Championship winning boats. Hi, Dario. Welcome to Long-Term Thinking for Business Success, and thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Rick. My pleasure to be here.
Before we dive into Carbonix, I'd love to hear about your experience with America's Cup. Could you share a story about your proudest achievement working on Cup teams?
Getting into America's Cup was a goal and a passion, basically, for as long as I can remember. It represents the highest level of yacht racing in a design challenge framework, with racing as in automotive, and that you've got one design where all the boats are the same and it's down to the skill of the sailor. And then you've got development classes where there is the ability to improve the technology of the boats and gain a winning edge that way. My interest was always in improving boat performance. And you work your way up from the lower leagues and more regional racing. And eventually I had the opportunity to effectively try out for a team and then join initially as a boat builder and eventually working my way up into the logistics of the building and the development of the boats, so a race engineer role. Part of that learning curve also was how an America's Cup team is funded and managed, because ultimately the challenge isn't just the fun part, building the boat and racing it, it's putting together the elements that you need, the budget, the team, the logistics, the systems. The achievements kind of change as you move through the team. So my first time around, just being there and really focusing on the minutiae of the technology, coming up with a slightly lighter solution for a deck fitting or figuring out a practical way to measure the loads on something. There's one particular experience where we're trying to figure out how strong a component in the mast needed to be to support the overlapping headsail, the jib on the America's Cup boat. And it landed on me to come up with a way to measure it. And it was literally, the solution was going down to the hardware store, buying a set of scales, duct taping them to the rig, and then going up there and reading the scale. That kind of very practical, very immediate, let's get a ballpark to guide the initial design. And then you move on to different versions, and then there's more sophisticated sensors and things that you can involve. But that sort of very gritty, very practical, iterative way to come to at least a version 1 or a version 0 of a design. I found that fascinating. We did things like try different paint finishes. We would paint one boat in one finish and another boat in another, and then tow them with a balance beam to see which hull had more drag. I think those experiences early on, when you're just really focused on doing the thing, the way I've come to think about it is you have the ability to raise more money and hire more people, but you don't have the ability to create more time. Because as the saying goes, the race is on Sunday and you've got to be ready. The aim doesn't become, make the perfect boat or make the most radical, the most innovative thing. It's make the best boat you can that's better than the other teams by race day. So everything has to work back from there, and the resources you have, no matter how small or big they are, have to be used to best effect to achieve that outcome. You raise as much money as you can, and then you pursue the things that will give you the best performance edge in the available time. And that's really critical because people think America's Cup boats, Formula One cars as infinite resources, everything has to be perfect. And it's just not the case. It's everything is just good enough to get to race day. That thinking is an analog to the various business practices of just in time and agile. It's really the best performance within a very specific context. So you could substitute performance for reliability or different characteristics, and the same thinking applies.
There's so many things to delve into there. I love the idea of looking at which paint creates more drag, because it's one of the principles I look at is how do we build compounding impact of small changes. So 1% changes over a long period is really good. And the other comment of perfection is the enemy of done. And when you've got a hard date that you can't move, you can't aim for perfection. You have to aim for the best you can at that point. So there's so many lessons that you can take out of that from business perspective as well.
That's exactly right. And the paint being an example, you can spend a lot of time getting 1% gains, and you do. But a 1% gain, say at the top of the mast, is worth more than a 1% gain at the bottom of the hull for various physics reasons around pitching and writing moments. So you also want to get those gains in the places where they give you the biggest impact.
To delve into Carbonix a little bit, what's the change you want to make? Or to put that another way, what's the vision you're trying to deliver? And who are your ideal customers?
As it says on the tin, it's aerial data capture at scale. What that means is the difference we make is give better, more accurate, more timely information to the operators of linear infrastructure, to land managers, to security forces. Basically, the idea is an eye in the sky gives you information that you wouldn't otherwise have, and that information can be used to gain insights, to make decisions. The way we came at our current market is we started out with a platform that's fairly agnostic to the application. We have an aircraft and a system of command and control and operations that goes with it that is able to carry a certain amount of weight for a certain time. It's specifically 5 kilos for 8 hours for the petrol hybrid version of the aircraft. Within that weight, we could carry several different payloads depending on the application. That could be a still camera, gimbal camera, a combination of the two, or a scanning lidar, or everything down to gas detectors and you name it, as long as it fits within the weight, volume, and power consumption constraints. Potentially, there are a lot of markets we could go after. As a business, you really need to prioritize the ones, again, bang for the buck, right? Our ideal customers are infrastructure operators, mainly power distribution and transmission, and miners, open cut mines. And a few reasons for that. Mainly, they have assets that are spread out geographically over large areas, and range gives us an edge in terms of the flight time that's sufficient to cover those large areas. They tend to be in the middle of nowhere or in sparsely populated areas, which makes it easier initially to obtain the various permits that we need to carry out those missions. And they tend to be few customers that have big needs. And so you're not dealing with 100 customers that each need one aircraft, you're dealing with maybe 10 customers that need 100 aircraft. So it's the way to scale. It's not by any means the only thing we can do. And we are working with customers who in turn are exploring markets such as bushfire prevention and detection and monitoring and military surveillance and security. So they're all applications we're interested in. But as a business, our focus is really on linear infrastructure and mining.
We'll come back to what I'll call it a niche, but having a very clear, in your case, a use case for the types of missions and types of customers, and also how you think about growth. And you mentioned fewer customers with more opportunity rather than a larger volume of customers. I'll come back to both of those. But before we do, I often find that as business owners, we're so focused on just continually driving growth and the success of the business that we often don't take a moment to think about what we've achieved. So thinking back over the 10, 15 years you've been thinking about and building Carbonix, what's something you're most proud of and why?
It's the buy-in that we're getting, that we have been getting. When you set out to lone vision, it's something in your head that's not tangible. And as you chip away at it and start ticking off the achievements and create an MVP and start to have a business structure and build a culture, people buying in, people starting to take it seriously, applying for jobs, which seems trivial, but it means they're willing to dedicate most of their waking hours to the mission and really get behind it and understand it and buy in and contribute their own version and interpretation and expertise. The vision is executed by the team, but it's also influenced by it. So it's not purely Dario's idea of what was going to happen. It's a collaboration of where the team also thinks it wants to go. And then there's this process where it's constantly tweaked and revised and pushed towards success. So personally, that buy-in, that idea that something that was just a thought is now a real thing and it's tangible and people want to be a part of it. The lesson that I drew is really that I didn't start out thinking of myself as a business owner. I've always been very interested in the tech. I've wanted to work in environments where there's a premium on performance. The initial approach, the culture, the thing I wanted to do was create an environment where it would make a tool that would make a real difference. And that difference comes from it being elegant and refined and when well built and high performance. The thing you learn is that is necessary but not sufficient. So once you've got the tool that can do something that nobody else can do, that's fantastic. Then you've got to convince the world to adopt it. Even though the value proposition that we bring to the table is very obvious, very clear. You can replace a helicopter, you can replace a crewed aircraft, take the pilot out of harm's way, make less noise, make less environmental impact, fly lower and slower for longer, get more data, all of that stuff. Very compelling. Everyone says, yep, where do I sign? The reality is that to incorporate that into the operations of an infrastructure operator like a miner or a power line company, there's a lot of other stuff that has to happen. They need to understand what it can and can't do, how it works, what regulatory and training and safety pieces need to go with it. They need to have sufficient confidence that it's going to work day in and day out the way a helicopter does. So that whole journey and watching effectively a new industry come to terms with that, go from we've got a cool idea and a great toy to we're actually trying to solve a commercial problem in the real world. That's been a very interesting part of the journey.
That's great. And there is similarity with my business. I'm trying to help business owners see a different way to bring marketing skills into their business that doesn't have to be on staff, but is still integrated into the team. And the journey of watching both my team and our clients and prospects understand the proposition and then go, oh, what a great idea. It makes me proud and very warming to get that. What I'm really interested in, and you mentioned earlier that I think pre-recording that the business was more consulting for the first couple of years, and I think probably lent heavily into your boating experience before you then moved into the uncrewed aerial systems. What was the journey? Was it an opportunity that you saw in the market to develop the uncrewed aerial systems, or was it as you started the journey of Carbonix, you suddenly found this opportunity and then dove headfirst into it?
Like a lot of businesses, you take two different things and put them together, and that's what generates the opportunity. In my case, one of the lessons I learned in racing is the importance of data, measuring everything from loads to sail shapes to courses through the water to differences in performance, and how key that is to making informed decisions. And through various connections and exposure, like seeing that writ large, so applying that to something like infrastructure made sense. If we were able to have more data, more detailed information, we could make things more efficient and they would work better, et cetera, et cetera. Then the second part of that was the actual technology, specifically the carbon fiber air elastic structures, which is thin laminates of carbon that can be shaped to complex aerodynamic shapes in a way that deform in a specific way to give you very efficient aerodynamic performance. The lessons learned in racing, where there's a lot of investment that goes into performance, obviously lent themselves to a lightweight airframe. So the initial vision was that there's some way to combine these two, to use a lightweight carbon fiber drone to solve this problem of getting data over long distances. In order to do that, they wanted to create a business around it. Initially, it was bootstrapped, and so I did what I knew, and I put together a facility to actually build these structures at a very small scale, but to show that the process could yield a thing that had the performance that it needed to have. And the way to fund that was to do effectively consultancy work for the marine industry, a couple of drone startups that wanted effectively custom work. We were happy to do that. And just using the proceeds from that to effectively subsidize the development of the very first airframe.
So the idea of doing the large geographical areas of data capture, was that an opportunity that you knew you wanted to get into, or did it really start from building I'll use a term that everybody would understand, a drone to facilitate the uncrewed aerial systems, that then you found the use case for it? The reality is, as business owners, we start a business that we think is going to be in A. On our way to delivering that, we find ourselves at B, then suddenly it's C, and the whole business is completely different to what we thought. So I'm just trying to work out whether you'd identified that market opportunity prior, and that was the vision that you were trying to get to, or you happened across it in your journey.
I had identified it prior, but it was not as narrowly focused. It was more of a broad notion rather than a specific plan. Again, data is important. We've got this lightweight material technology. We can build an aircraft that flies further. Exactly what that looks like and exactly what the application probably was quite open for actually quite a long time until we consciously narrowed it down. So whether it was agriculture as opposed to gas sniffers as opposed to what we're doing now, that came later because having exposure to the different markets, you get to understand, okay, agriculture has these requirements and these limitations, and mining has these other ones. And so you just adapt to the one that is the best fit. The idea of a sort of payload agnostic long range platform was there from the beginning. The thing that really became obvious early on was the conventional way to launch and retrieve a drone, which is basically using a catapult, was not going to work for the applications we were looking for. So being able to solve the problem of launch and retrieval, so effectively develop vertical takeoff and landing, that became the biggest unforeseen challenge. In something like a mine site, like you just can't have that equipment. It's not practical. And so the development...
Sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to understand, when you say you can't have that equipment, it's not practical, you mean to have a horizontal catapult-driven takeoff versus the vertical?
Correct. Yeah. So it's getting it to site. There's the energy storage part of it where it's potentially dangerous, the lack of accuracy, the lack of fallbacks and redundancies. There's just nuances around how you're actually going to operate this thing. That's really what became the driver along the journey. The idea of a long-range drone platform was there from the beginning.
Thank you for that. You mentioned earlier that you started the business as a bootstrap business with doing some consulting work and tangential sort of work that you could bring from your previous experiences. I'm sure you now appreciate building technology of the scale that you're creating takes not just a dedication to a vision, which you definitely have, but ultimately it's going to require capital to support the research and development to facilitate the growth and the learning of the business. I assume at some point you took on some investment. And if that is correct, how did you approach fundraising, and what are some of the key lessons that you took away from that fundraising experience?
I think absolutely right. So hardware is hard. It is capital intensive. There's a lot of testing required. There are a lot of very specialized skills that you need to hire and develop. So certainly capital intensive. I guess I had the vague notion going in, but probably naively, I thought I could grow it organically at the very beginning. And I wanted to get to the point where at least I had a tangible product rather than selling an idea. Basically, we got to the point where we had an airframe that could fly as an RC aircraft, where it was basic, but we proved that the facility supported building it and the design was viable. Then I looked at effectively buying avionics off the shelf. At the time, there was very little you could buy that would meet requirements to operate what was at the time a relatively large drone in a way that's commercially consistent, that can fly in weather, that can be replicated, that gives you a level of assurance and reliability that you need for the kind of commercial operations we wanted to do. And basically not being able to find something like that off the shelf. So realizing that it's not just the airframe, we need to develop within the business the skills to certainly integrate and in some cases design some fairly sophisticated electronics. You project that out and it becomes pretty obvious that there's some money required to make that happen. And so it was a very straightforward seed round, I guess you'd call it, to effectively raise money through equity to do that phase of the product development. And at the same time, we were having conversations with customers, with early adopters, to go and do demonstrations, do proof of concepts, and show that there's actually a receptiveness in the market for what we're offering.
And if you were to do the business again, and again, you started as a bootstrapper, etc., but would you change the way you approached the start of the business? Would you have fundraised earlier to get there quicker, or would you have changed anything?
Good question. I think in hindsight, the timing was pretty good. I think funding early, obviously, it's a founder's dilemma, right? How much equity do I give away in exchange for having the resources, the firepower, and also the advice, the knowledge of an investor? I think being able to show something real, if you can do that, if you can afford to do that as a founder, that puts you in a much better position. And then the things you learn, again, when I started, I was 29. You learn through experience. Things like the approach to investment is that to some extent, money is fungible and you're not just looking for the money, you're looking for a partnership with an investor that will bring something to the table, have your back, be there for the growth, be aligned in terms of the timing and what you want to achieve. I think I was very fortunate to have that, and the business has that still today. Being conscious of that and mindful of it rather than just being lucky is important, I think, for a founder to really have that. It's almost a confidence to say that an investor's buying into my vision. Part of that is surrounding yourself with the right team and with complementary skills. I'm very technical. I was very aware that I needed someone more business savvy than myself to look at that side of the business. And then doing that consciously rather than trying to remain basically the bottleneck in the business, I think is very important.
This may be a little bit too simplistic, but when you think about money, as you say, not every dollar is equal. And it's, especially to start up, a person with limited business experience, as you said, the goal is to bring a partner that can add more value than just the dollars. And you can often look at somebody who's brings the business experience to the table, potentially a client who's going to help fund the R&D because they've got an immediate use case, or somebody within the industry, a partner, a supplier that you're going to have a relationship with. When you looked at the types of partners you went forward, is that the general area or areas that you considered for a specific partner, and the funding that you brought in and the partner that you've then built it with, where do they sit in the skills that they brought to the table?
Generally, yes, but I think it's less important that they have the specific expertise. They don't necessarily have to come out of the customer industries, for example. They can have experience in an analogous area where there's a new technology being adopted in a market. It's more about having the skills to navigate the areas that aren't necessarily familiar to me as a technical person or as a founder, the sales, the marketing, regulatory compliance. In most cases, it's going to be more than one. So you have a couple that come in as at the seed stage, and they're almost mentors. It's really about applying their experience to a new area, moderated through my own lens. Then we did have technical partners that also brought in. So, for example, Quickstep became a shareholder.
Who were Quickstep?
Quickstep are a composites manufacturer that's mainly focused on defense aerospace. They're a listed company. They have a facility in Bankstown building parts for F-35s and sort of military transport aircraft, all in composites. And then they have a facility in Geelong that is now mostly focused on building drones. And that investment from them into Carbonix was partly a way to shore up that relationship for us to have someone who can scale our manufacturing. In that sense, we're very aligned. Now, that's probably something that maybe comes a bit later once there's a more established direction and a critical mass of expertise that can navigate that kind of relationship within our business, which we had. But yeah, it's almost a chemistry thing. It's, you meet potential investors and partners, and the most important thing is that they're value aligned. You get on with them, basically. You have that you're going to be able to talk to them and sort things out as they arise. And the secondary thing is the skills, the industries, and the practical advantages that they can bring.
Thanks for that. Just to jump back to a catchphrase you used earlier, that hardware is hard, and it definitely is, but you've got the added challenge of sometimes your hardware may not come back and land properly. I imagine there's going to be some stories where the plane didn't return, or the drone didn't return, or didn't return intact. That is interesting. So I just thought I'd fish to see if there's any key moments where the team's waiting for it to come back.
Lots of stories like that. I often use the analogy of the computer on the Apollo spacecraft, where people are very fond of saying that I'd had less computing power than not even a mobile phone, but like a pocket calculator. And yet they managed to achieve guidance, navigation, and everything they needed to do. The thing that is not obvious is that computing power, though limited, was extremely reliable. hierarchies of redundancy, the way it was physically wired together. I think there is a trade-off between features and reliability, particularly early on. With a drone, as you say, you don't have the luxury of just turning it on, off and on again if it has a failure within flight. It's all designed around that. So you look at redundancies, you look at strain relief for connectors and how you package things, how you access them. It does mean that you trade off, in some instances, sophistication against robustness. The way we approach it is we're very big on testing. That's on the bench. We've got test rigs that can do hardware in the loop simulations for components, subsystems, and the whole aircraft. Then we go out and flight test. We're very conscious that in a testing environments, things will go wrong. That's the point of testing. And so we don't care about losing an aircraft as long as we do it in a safe way. We say, okay, we're going to do the flight in a way that's known and controlled. Then we're going to do the test. And if the test result is A, we do this. If it's B, we do that. And one of the things might be that we terminate the flight. But it's all done very consciously. That's something that obviously evolves because the first time you do it, you don't know what's going to go wrong. You think through it and you plan as best you can, but you're always learning. It's all done in that conscious way, whereas don't care about breaking the aircraft, but we really care about hurting people. So we make sure we take safety very seriously.
I'm sure you do, and I wasn't trying to suggest anything else, but I still struggle to believe your team and you have spent hours, days, possibly years building a flying aircraft that then crashes. It's got to hurt a little bit.
It does, particularly for the guys in the workshop where they've lovingly built this thing and it comes back in shards. We actually have an installation on the wall that has all the plaques from the fallen aircraft. It's a double-digit number. That is how you show customers that you've covered your bases. The one that really hurts is when it fails due to something silly or simple or stupid. And that once you have systems and checks in place, that happens very rarely.
As I mentioned earlier, you're the founder, but you're not the CEO of Carbonix. And as a founder of a business, our roles constantly change. Can you share what your top priorities are in the business and how you make sure you remain focused on those and that other people in the business run what they're responsible for?
It's difficult. I won't pretend it's not. It's letting go of something that you very much care about. It's down to this trust and buy-in. Like you've got people that get it, bring skills to the table, run with it, care about it, are invested themselves. And so you build that trust and that allows you to just step away from certain areas that are very key. My main focus evolves. At one point, I stepped from CEO to CTO and just basically asked the CEO to run the business and do all the outward-facing stuff, the admin, the strategic customer relationships, things like that. And I was focused on getting the tech to work. Then once the technical team got to the point where they could run with that, then I stepped away from the CTO as well. It's a floating role at the moment. It's really about, first and foremost, culture and strategy. So making sure we maintain the focus on quality, the practical approaches to problem solving, the rigor around getting things consistent, even down to work practices and workshop cleanliness, like that sort of stuff. Not necessarily going in and being active in that role, but just communicating all the time. That's important, and we've got to keep it in mind. Then a lot of the way I spend my time is the outward facing, evangelizing for the business with various stakeholders, high level customer stuff, a lot of regulatory interactions, the strategic stuff around that, investor relations, looking at what conversations do we have to have now in view of the next capital raise. It's very high level, and it's a little bit of a coaching role as well to different areas in the business, certainly the technical team, working with management and giving my feedback on how I think they should be or are performing or the directions.
Just to pick up on the culture part of your answer, and yes, every founder should have a key eye on the culture, even if there are management teams around you. And given that trust and accountability are critical for an effective team, can you share your approach to building that trust and accountability within your team members? The goal here is that when you're not in the room, they're still following the behaviors that you've tried to embed in the company culture.
Just developing relationships at an individual level and really communicating, taking their feedback, giving my thoughts, being present, not all the time, but enough to see where the issues are and help out with that. And then there's a formal sort of board role as well, where we have a very good board and coach the management team from a board level to be aligned, to look at exactly what are we trying to achieve and be clear about that and act accordingly.
You've already touched on some of this, but despite all the careful planning we do in our business and the clarity on the vision of where we're trying to get to, unexpected things always happen, especially in a business like yours, where you're really creating both a new product and a new market. When you think back over the 10 years of building Carbonix, I'm curious to know if something took you by surprise, and if you did, how did you adjust the business strategy to achieve success?
The level of custom work we had to do to get the avionics to a level that we wanted. I think I'd underestimated that going in. Then also seeing the ecosystem evolve around the industry. There's now a peak body for the industry called AAUS, so the Australian Association for Uncrewed Systems, that went from being very tentative and small and having businesses in there that were very much in the dreamy startup world to something that's now very practical in terms of communicating to government, to regulators, what the barriers are for the industry, facilitating coordination and connections between industry players. So that's one example, but throughout the industry, the way companies that may have set out to become drone manufacturers then pivoted into software or specialized in motors, seeing that evolution and finding our place in that, being an OEM and an integrator, we're at the center of working with specialist payload suppliers that they might build the camera and then we integrate the camera into our aircraft, and realizing that we have the same customer, because when they sell a camera, it's got to go on an aircraft, and we sell an aircraft that needs a camera. Those kinds of synergies, I think watching those transform over time, where the players mature and find their niche, and then you figure out how it all fits together, and realizing that one of the cardinal rules of engineering is don't build something you can buy. The fact that there's more stuff we can buy now certainly makes life easier, but the surprise at the time was that there wasn't that much that we could buy, and we had to build it ourselves.
You've obviously had to create a new market, as you've said a few times. And at the start of the business, you would have had to have found clients that are both comfortable with taking the risk of working with a new startup, as well as a new technology and a whole new service, or at least approach to the way they were trying to do something previously. Given those learning or that experience, can you share some of your experience winning your early customers and how you overcame their concerns?
Being able to solve their problem obviously requires you to understand what is it they're trying to achieve, and it's not necessarily obvious. What we found often is that they would bring to the table what they were used to in terms of flying crewed aircraft. So they're like,
sorry, just to interrupt you, and I apologize, but was it a problem that they had? So were you solving a problem, or were you iteratively improving something that they were already doing? So you're actually showing them a better way to do something. Do you understand the nuance?
yeah, it's an interesting distinction. So I think both, depending on the application. For example, one of our early missions was flying for Fujitsu, who in turn was doing work for the state government on detecting invasive species in national parks, plants and animals. They had, as within innovation mandate, to do this with drones, because again, you can't really do it with helicopters at the scale that they were talking about. And they did some trials and they played around with multi-rotors, which is the obvious thing that you could buy. So multi-rotors being quadcopters or octocopters, things that basically hover. They were getting reasonably good data. They were happy that they were getting the resolution and they were able to identify the things they wanted to identify, but it just wasn't practical because with a 20-minute flight time, you couldn't get the coverage you needed. You couldn't overcome gradients and wind and weather and all those things. So in that sense, our platform could satisfy the requirement. It could do a job that they couldn't otherwise do. But the problem already existed. They'd identified that we ideally want to have this information because it would help us plan interventions, et cetera, et cetera. Let's do it with drones. These drones are limited. Let's try these other drones. So in that sense, we were making available a capability that wasn't there before. Now, similarly with the power lines, we start out effectively doing what they're already doing, but better. So they are flying helicopters to do things like vegetation encroachment checks. So they fly every 6 months. They look at, are the trees too close to the power lines? They identify where they need to be pruned, and then they go through and prune them, and then they do another flight to check that it's been done to spec. And so they're doing it now. It's expensive, burns a lot of fuel. They're quite limited in how low and slow they can go to really get that close-up data. It's an imperfect solution, but it works. In that sense, we're solving the problem better. We're doing it cheaper, more frequently, lower down, higher resolution. So on a like-for-like basis, it's improving something they're already doing. But once they have our drone in the air and they know its capability, then they start using it to do things that they wouldn't otherwise be doing. So they start looking for other things because now they can see the individual conductors, they can see the footings of the towers and the heads of the pole, the tops of the poles. Then they'll call us and say, can you fly this line in that valley where the helicopter can't get in? Or can you go into this area where there's a flood and we want to see exactly how far the flood water is moving? You start off doing what they're already doing better, and then you open the door to new things that they wouldn't otherwise be doing.
It must be so rewarding when a customer rings you and say, hey, can we use your technology to enable this solution for us because we didn't even know we had a problem here?
Correct. That's where the vision and the scale comes in. At the moment, we go out there, we fly a mission. There's a pilot that sits out in the field at the launch site, effectively monitors the mission. The aircraft does its thing, comes back, and then they get the data and they upload it. We're already in the process of moving to a remote operation where the pilot sits in an office and the aircraft's out in the field doing its thing. Because once it's beyond line of sight, it's the same thing. The next step is what we'll call remote one-to-many, where you have one pilot monitoring several aircraft, and that just leverages the ability of one pilot to now cover more area, control more drones. That makes it cheaper, which makes it even more accessible in terms of doing more. Educating the customer around that and saying that, okay, today we can go out and we can fly 200-kilometer mission and get you the data, show you that it works. But let's start working together today to plan next year's mission, which might be 1,000 kilometers, and then the year after, which might be 10,000. It's going on that journey with them. It's saying you need to start now playing with this thing, becoming familiar with it, incorporating it into your business as usual and your planning. So next year you'll be able to do the bigger one, and next year the bigger again, and so on.
Thanks for that, which is a really good segue to my next question. So when you started the business, and in fact, some of the examples you used there were lots of use cases that you were playing around with. Today, and I used the word earlier, you've got a much clearer niche or a very specific market and service that you're trying to deliver to. I assume that was developed over the 10 years of the business. What did you see in the business, or why did you drive it down into quite a specific use case? And how much courage did it take to say no to other things?
I still find it very difficult to say no, but we're getting better at it. So part of it was realizing that we were spreading ourselves very thin, and that you only have that realization once you're there, because initially you're like, wow, customers, yes, let's do everything. You soon realize, hang on, one customer wants us to install this camera and fly this particular mission. The other one wants us to do that. As you get into the weeds, you realize there are different requirements and you spread yourself too thinly. So zooming out and saying, hang on, this customer with this payload needs 100,000 kilometers or whatever it is. This other one only needs mission next week, and then we don't hear from him for 6 months. You very quickly say, okay, let's focus on the one that has the large need. That's purely on the market. The interesting thing is when you're proposing something that's so radically different to what they're doing today, it's on the innovator to take away all the little things that cause friction, that could cause hesitation and delay adoption. So early on, we were selling aircraft and we were saying, here you go, here's a sale, here's a training package, here's some support to get your approvals, now off you go and fly. And what we're finding is that the aircraft might sit in the customer's shed for 3 weeks, and then it might fly for a week, and then it might sit in the shed for another 2 weeks. And so the utilization was not optimal. We pivoted towards a service model where we're the operator, we're the expert. We want to take that friction away. So we want to say, customer wants the data, what's the easiest way for them for the data to appear in their inbox and not have to worry about all the logistics and risk and things that you need to address around it. That evolution was focus on the customers where there is scale and support them in all the stuff that needs to go around the aircraft. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does very nicely. It's interesting. We always talk about niche with our clients from a marketing perspective, but fundamentally it's a business strategy, not a marketing strategy. And the clearer the niche with a clearer value proposition, the easier it is to sell. We work with lots of engineering-led businesses and they always say, but my technology or my service can work in a variety of different fields. We go, yes, it can, but you can't drive growth by being spread thinly across multiple things. So let's pick one. Doesn't mean we can't move to another one in the future, but let's nail one use case or one business challenge and one customer segment and then grow out from there, which it sounds like is what you're doing. What's even more interesting for you is that as you win a single customer, the use cases that one customer is bringing to your table is even better. So it's not that you're trying to sell the same service to multiple customers, you're getting more and more service from the one customer.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and
Yeah.
this is my next question was around how you think about company growth. And not to say that you can't do both, bring on new clients versus build deeper relationships. I'm interested today in the business, 10 years in, you're working with a fairly specific use case. Are you, as a business, more focused on driving better relationships to drive continual growth and a repeat purchase from a client versus trying to build out more and more clients? Where's the priority?
The mandate, the direction the team has, and the priority is let's make our existing customers super happy. Let's prove that it's an ongoing thing and they're going to come back. And let's line up future customers as and when we can support them. The temptation is always with more money, you could do stuff in parallel. And up to a point, that's true. But there are also some basic things that you need to get in place and make sure that you can manage that growth without losing quality.
You mentioned earlier that at some point you were selling the aircraft and then you moved into a model of service rather than selling. You were renting it and providing the service. So I imagine at a business level, that change in model went from a short-term revenue kick, which was probably very nice at the beginning, but to a much longer sustainable revenue stream. Was that the driver of that change in service? Or was it much more the fact that you saw that your aircraft just weren't being leveraged and you wanted to change that issue of a client just investing in it, but not then necessarily getting the leverage out of it?
The driver initially was we want these things to be utilized, because if we can get it back when they're not using it, then we don't have to build another one for someone else. So it was very practical. It was also around giving them the support as a service, where they're not just buying a piece of hardware, but they have that support that goes around it. And then when you actually translate that into a business model, then for sure, you utilize your assets more efficiently, you can amortize them over time, you can finance them, and you have recurring revenue. So it's a win. The fact that it's a better business case, I think, reflects the fact that it's more value for the customer.
I think what I take away from that is that we need to be open to changing our business model as the businesses change and develop, and not be blinkered focused on this is what we're doing and only open to that. Then we can not see what is just around the corner to benefit. Just to do quite a hard left turn, given your passion for design and system thinking, can you tell us about a business system or process that you've developed that has significantly impacted your business and what success or what impact it created?
The primary one that comes to mind is probably the org chart and the way the business works. It's very complex, but heterogeneous, where you have all these disparate specialties that have to come together in a particular way. So if you think of an aircraft, it's primarily a packaging exercise. You've got aerodynamic design that wants the thing to be as compact and streamlined as possible. You've got structural design that needs to be strong and robust, so they actually would like it to be chunkier. It's got to package in everything from the payload to the propulsion to the avionics. There's that side of putting all these different engineers in a room and getting them to agree on the best compromise. Then around the aircraft, you've got operations, you've got logistics, you've got regulatory compliance. There's a tension there where every time you change something, you potentially introduce a risk, but you need to change it to make it better. Everyone has a different ideal, and bringing all that together is the challenge into something that's coherent. The way we've done it is you effectively have streams and you have stream leads. So you might have airframe, avionics, structures, operations, flight test engineering, being able to build a framework for those silos to communicate, to be on the same page on what the focus is from a day-to-day basis, week by week, month by month. I think that's really credit goes to a CEO who came in and made that a lot more formal than it was as it grew organically. And part of that is culture, part of that is the communication systems, the processes that allow that coordination to happen. On the day-to-day operation of the business is really the way the org chart is structured.
Ironically, it takes us all the way back to your yacht manufacturing design work, where you, as you said at the beginning, your premium was on performance. Everything can be better. The question is, what is it better against? In the yachts, it was better on performance, but in business or in the aircraft you're building today, everybody wants to be better on their area. So if you can get your org chart to agree on what are we trying to build a premium on and what are we trying to be better at, then it's much easier to make the decisions internally. That's what I take away from your structure, and you've built a process to agree on what we're trying to be optimally premium at.
I keep coming back to the thing that enables the scale and the value is the range. So it's the ability to fly over long distances. That's not trivial in the sense that it requires an efficient airframe and energy dense batteries and all of that stuff. As a technical challenge, that is important because range drives cost per hectare or cost per kilometre of the scanning and the operations that we do. And it has to be achieved reliably, and it has to be in weather, and it has to be regulatory compliant and all of that stuff. So the premium is still on performance, but it has to be within parameters. So it's not performance at the expense of taking another 6 months to deliver. It's not performance at the expense of not having the features you want and not being regulatory compliant. It's performance within the parameters, within the time frame. And I think that's really the purpose of that org chart and that organization, is to actually come back and say, okay, what are we actually trying to achieve next week?
We look at it similarly in marketing. We run a positioning exercise with our clients. Clients want lots of different things, but the reality is they can only ever remember one or maybe two things that you're good at. And ultimately, if you can build a positioning on one key that drives a differentiation from your competitors, and it's exactly the same thing. Yes, we could be range or payload or data or whatever, but actually the better we can be on range and competitive beyond that, the more value we can bring to everything else. Our role in developing marketing strategies for clients is to push them to go, what is it that you want to be known for? And then everything is around that story. A great strategy is focused on the most impactful activities. And our experience shows a company at any point can really only effectively work on quite a finite number of top priorities, typically 3 or maybe 4. Can you talk about 1 or 2 of your current strategic initiatives?
I think that's changed dramatically over time. So initially it was down to making a good airplane. Now it's more around customer driven, in the sense that we've got customers that are asking us for specific things, and how do we prioritize and accommodate them? Which mission do we do first? Some missions may require a tweak to the payload or the software or some other element of the aircraft, and have everyone give their input about, I have a blocker for this, I can't do this if you want me to do that. And getting it all on the table, getting it all resolved in a way that everyone walks away happy that what they're aiming to do is clear and achievable. And revisiting that very often because things change. It's all focused on what do our customers want us to do when, and how do we get there. Then at the same time, in parallel or between all those things, we have a product roadmap that will unlock certain things that our customers want.
Just to take a bit of a broader view, Bill Gates famously said, we overestimate what we can get done in 1 year, but underestimate what we can get done in 10 years. Where do you see Carbonix in the next 5 years? And what do you think the key obstacles you'll have to overcome to get there?
Where I see us is the addressable market is every power line and every mine, and beyond that, military and security. How quickly we get there depends on all those things. How quickly we can implement the roadmap, stretch our legs, get out there over larger areas, longer distances, and the remote one-to-many model. And part of that is capital to fuel that growth. That's really the aim, to expand, to basically do what we're doing now, but over more customers, larger areas, and more efficiently.
And just focused predominantly on the Australian market, or is international on your horizon as well?
Very much Australia and the US. We know there is potential in other markets, and it's a matter of bandwidth to be able to address them.
That talks to the benefit of hardware. It is hard, as you said at the beginning, but over time, hardware, as it scales, the cost of building that becomes cheaper and cheaper, which enables you to grow in different markets.
It's also a moat to get to the product that we have now. No matter how much money you throw at it, will take at a minimum 5 years to get to a level where you have the reliability, you have the approvals, you have the reputation. The fact that we're ahead and we're already doing it and we have a plan to make it even better puts us in a unique position.
And that's a perfect place to end. So thank you for allowing us to dive into Carbonix and for sharing your experience, lessons, and really your commitment to performance. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. My pleasure.